Welcome to DRTSPR show. This is Dr. Tangella Shivaprasad Reddy alias Dr. TSPR. Namaste, Adab, hello, and a warm welcome to Soumya Dattaji. I don't need to again reintroduce him. He is a man of all seasons. So I can always say that. So we are taking up an issue which we have already discussed a year ago when he has showed his cousin's videos from US. How one part of US becomes hotter, the other part of US becomes too cold, and it's raining. And similarly, he compared that with Delhi, Himalayan region, what would happen then, Indian southernmost regions. The prophecy is coming true. Now, the wildfires in the biggest state of America, California, which carries 54 electoral this thing, and such a huge population, their capital city, Los Angeles, is under fire. Fire means the wildfires have engulfed the posh areas, abetting the ocean, destroying everything. And believe me, this is winter time there. 8 decades, in 80 years, this is the first time in winter, Los Angeles, California state is burning. America is burning. Why? The vagaries of weather. So before I take a word from him, I'll just go straight away to some visuals so that it will be easy for all of us to understand the nature that America is no different. So these are all the visuals which Sarah changed. I'm just playing some videos.
Are sweeping across the Los Angeles area. And you might be wondering, why is this happening now in the middle of winter? January is typically one of LA's wettest months, so major fires are rare. But the climate crisis is changing fire behavior by driving hotter temperatures and more extreme swings from wet to dry conditions.
November, December, now January. There's no fire season, it's fire year, it's year round.
It's unclear what sparked the blazes, but they're being fueled by Santa Ana winds, strong, warm, seasonal winds which flow from the desert through the mountain toward the California coastline. These winds are not unusual for this time of year, but have been exceptionally powerful and have arrived as LA grapples with drought. It's been the driest start to LA's wet season for more than 80 years, parching a landscape which has a lot of vegetation after an exceptionally wet winter last year. This has created perfect fire fuel. Crucially, every wildfire has its own unique set of circumstances. But as we've seen in recent years, climate change is loading the dice in favor of more intense and more rapidly spreading blazes. Out of control blazes are sweeping across the...
Yeah. These climate changes, yes, predicted long back. Some say it is because of artificial intelligence sabotage or whether it is man-made. Soumya Datta ji was very clear when he predicted this 1 year ago. 1 year ago. And now this is another thing. There is no water in California because irony is such a learned
suffer
state.
through unprecedented drought. One billionaire couple owns a massive share of the state's water system.
That is
seized in a series of secretive meetings 2 decades ago. That system was largely paid for by the very taxpayers whose water these billionaires hold hostage. Urban water systems are desperate for water, but in 2023, they'll receive just 5% of what they requested from the state. The Resnicks are the biggest farmers in California. As of 2007, they owned 4 San Francisco's worth of farmland, and nearly half of Americans buy at least one of their products. Their pistachios, their pomegranate juice, their mandarins, their flowers. It's all under one massive umbrella, the Wonderful Company, a privately owned company worth at least $5 billion. The majority owners, the Resnicks, are worth at least $8 billion. How were they able to take over such a large percentage of what should be a shared public resource? This is The Classroom from More Perfect Union, and today we're looking at how the Resnicks got rich. Linda is a former child actress, the daughter of Jack Harris, a successful movie distributor of the 1950s, most well known for the...
That is enough, I think. How they are trying to control, because I have to give time to Soumya Datta ji, and you will explain.
Natural part of life on Earth. The Santa Ana winds that blow across Southern California during the wintertime, they've been happening for centuries. But the conditions that preceded this current Southern California firestorm and the one that consumed parts of Maui back in 2023, they're not typical, even though they are part of what's becoming a new normal. Here's what's happened. Over the past couple of years leading up to this year, Southern California got anywhere from 150 to 200% of their normal rainfall. That's 1.5 to 2 times the normal amount of rain they would have received. That led to a lot of brush growth. Jump to this year, from October of 2024 through today, places like Los Angeles have only gotten 1% of their average amount of rainfall during that time. That has led to all that fresh brush that grew over the past few seasons to turn into dry, dead brush now. And that dry, dead brush is what's helping to fuel these wildfires. Yes, the winds are blowing strong, but if that fuel wasn't there, we wouldn't be having quite as big of a problem. Now, those back-to-back really wet seasons and extremely, in fact, historically dry seasons, those are becoming more common. In a new study out from UCLA climate scientist Daniel Swain, he shows that climate change is creating those back-to-back occurrences more frequently. That climate change is caused by you and me burning fossil fuels, and that changed climate is becoming more and more dangerous for us to live in.
This is what he has been saying, Soumya Dutta ji, on our channels. People tend to ignore. 1 year back, if he remembers, I'll just try to... Now even the insurance companies have gone back. Now I think they have brought a law to see that...
powerful and important California is. California has a total GDP of approximately $3.6 trillion, which is the highest in the country. California's economy is so big that if it was to be an independent country, then California's economy would be bigger than countries like India, United Kingdom, and France. California is a center of innovation, particularly Silicon Valley, which is home to some of the world's leading technology companies such as Google, Apple, Facebook, and is a major hub for startups. California is also very big on agriculture. The Central Valley in California grows over 230 types of crops. $21 billion alone comes from exporting agricultural goods from California, as California produces 80% of the world's almonds and accounts for over 90% of the U.S. production of processed tomatoes. California also produces over 90% of American wines. California is also the most populous state with a population of 39 million, which means the state of California has more people than all of Canada. And being the most populous states, California also has 55 electoral votes, which is the highest number of electoral votes for a state in presidential elections. Most Americans don't know how powerful and important.
Because we are showing everything is there, but why they could not predict? Why they could not predict this? That is the $1 million question. Just last 2 minutes of video and then we'll go.
Los Angeles, California, the heart of the Golden State where dreams come alive. From the bustling streets of downtown to the scenic views of Malibu, experience the magic of Los Angeles. Welcome to Los Angeles.
Yeah. So shall I start showing your visuals, sir? Because there are many.
I think we can start and explain.
This one first?
Any one of these, because I have sent it in random order, but these two visuals that
you can explain this first, how one part of America is this.
But maybe we'll show this map first, which I sent, then this will make more sense. The map of the US thermal, the temperature, right? This one.
Yeah.
This is the thermal imagery from NASA GEOS satellites. That's Aqua satellite has taken this. Aqua and Terra, there's a couple of satellites. They take regular measurements of temperature, moisture, etc., etc. Here we can very clearly see that at the peak of winter, large parts of the US west coast, including Mexico, and the Florida part, and adjacent parts of Florida also, are unusually warm. Unusually warm means temperature has reached beyond 25 degrees Celsius in many places. And just to compare, even in Delhi, which is at a much lower latitude of 28 degrees north, 28 plus degrees north, we are having a day temperature, maximum temperature of around 19-20 degree. And these higher latitudes, now in their peak of winter, they are having temperatures of 22, 24 degrees, 25 degrees Celsius. And while simultaneously, you can see the northern and northeast part of the US is actually extremely cold, close to the Arctic temperatures. And this is because the polar vortex broke through. And this is what happens due to climate change, because due to climate change, the force of the jet stream, which circles on the polar circle, weakens. And once it weakens, the polar vortex, which contains the extremely cold polar winds, and this is in case of the North Pole. Similar things happen in the South Pole, but South Pole, since around the South Pole there is no human beings living, we don't feel the impact on the human populations. But just south of the North Polar regions, there are a lot of countries, quite rich countries, and including the European Nordic countries, the US, Canada and US, Russia, etc., etc. So where you can see very clearly the dark blue areas where the temperature at the same point of time in January, and this is from January 8, if I recollect, this is a January 8 satellite data.
Yeah.
This shows the dark blue areas have reached minus 30 degrees Celsius.
Goodness.
And at the same time, on the left-hand side, you can see US West Coast has reached 22 plus degrees Celsius. So a difference of around 52 degrees Celsius on the same day, on the same country, two different places. And this is what the climate change we have been, it's not me only, is the climate scientists have been predicting this for the last 15-20 years, that one of the signature effects is complete unpredictability and localization. That within, this is in a large scale, because the US is almost more than 2.5 times India's size.
Yes.
But even within US, you can see within regions there is massive variations. So this is one of the well predicted, long predicted effects of climate change, that it's not just global. It's not just warming increases by a little bit every year or every decade. It's extreme events happening, and the swings from extreme events, like in the western coast of US, like this one of the videos explained, we know this from repeated occurrences. If there is a very high rainfall in 1 year, then the grasses and bushes, they grow. And after that, if there are 1 or 2 years there is no rains or very little rain, then they dry out and it creates conditions suitable for fire. And at the same time, we are seeing that hot and dry winds are fanning those fires. So this is exactly what a climate apocalypse, or you can say a climate chaos world, is meant for. And this is what I think I'll say, that this is just the curtain raiser. This kind of massive events are increasing very fast. And as the UN disaster database shows, these hydrological disasters, like extremely dry conditions, very wet and very strong storms, very wet conditions, very cold situations where huge amount of snowfall happens, these kind of hydrological events are increasing at a very fast rate. And this, you can see, this is the condition on, again, 8th January in the US, northeast of the US. Well, all the news were focusing on this, what is happening in Los Angeles and this California, and the Palisades fire, the two biggest fires. One, Palisades is one of the biggest fires that is happening. And unusually, normally these fires, this US West Coast fires happen during June, July and August. Because in the US, it is peak of the winter now. It's should be very cold all across. Because it's, if we recollect that latitudes are more than 35 degrees. But simultaneously, unusual cold on the northeast and northern areas of US, which is unusual means minus 30 degree is almost Arctic condition, subarctic conditions. So that should not happen in the northern US at all. But this is what is happening due to climate change. And the reasons are also, it's not just the temperatures. See, over the last 2 years, the sea surface temperatures across the world, the temperature of the first 50 meters or so across the world. And I will explain this why this is happening. Which is also forcing a huge number of people. See, California, some of the historical fires, if you look at over the last 50, 60 years, the largest fire burnt around 10,000, 11,000 houses. This year, this Palisades and the second largest fire together, they have already burned something like 5,000 houses, I think. Figures are increasing even now. Because these fires, only 2 of the 8 fires have been contained. Rest of the fires have not been contained yet. That means they are still either spreading or going on. So if we look at why this is happening, and can you go back to that? This one, put this on.
Yeah.
This is not because US is the sort of richest country in the world. US is the most dominant country in the world. So something that happens in the US gets highlighted all across the world because US also dominates the media, not only the financial world and the military world, but also the media. So anything happens in the US, that gets highlighted very much. But if we look at the world, whole world, what are the major climatic events that has happened due to the disruption of the water cycle, the hydrological cycle? And you see, it's not only the US which is suffering. It has happened across the world. These blue and pinkish or yellowish dots all around, and I'll not go into detail because there are a huge number of them, and these are the major ones. These are so-called billion-dollar plus losses, major events. So these are spreading all across the world. These are in Africa, as you can see, and even in Eastern Africa, which is normally very green and wet, like Kenya and Tanzania. Nobody associates with massive disasters. But last year and 23 onwards, Kenya first suffered from a huge drought where thousands of wild animals died, including hundreds of elephants died. Actually, lakhs of wild animals died. Lakhs of domesticated animals died. And then after a few months, Kenya suffered a massive flooding event. So, and in this blue dot in Kenya, you can see this, and these are explained. But there are multiple such events happening all across the world. In India, the Wayanad 2024 is infamous for the Wayanad disaster in Kerala, where I think in 2 days, the entire 6 months rainfall or more poured down. And why this is happening in the hydrological cycle? 2 factors have combined. One, the ocean temperatures, sea surface temperatures are very high. And the record shows that the 23 and 24, these 2 years, in fact, 24 has gone even beyond 23. 23 broke all records, but 24 has gone even beyond 23. These are unusually high. So as the ocean surface temperatures, sea surface temperatures are high, it's putting a lot of moisture in the air. Lots of moisture. Like if we heat up a water in a pan, a lot of steam comes out. So similarly, it is putting a lot of steam or not steam, but water vapor in the air. Simultaneously, because of global warming, the air is warmer. If air is warmer by 1 degree Celsius, it can hold 7% extra moisture. So if the air is warmer by 3 or 4 or even 5 degrees Celsius, it can hold 28, 30% extra moisture. But when that warm and moist air rises and cools, because as it rises, it expands and cools. So when it cools and it goes over land, it has to come down as super heavy rainfall at some place. Like it happened in 2023 in Himachal. There was a massive rainfall, sudden massive rainfall over large parts of Himachal Pradesh. Thousands of kilometers of newly built expressways and 4-lane highways got damaged. Hundreds of villages got damaged. Something like 450 people lost their lives. And the state was hit very, very badly. So these kind of events are not only happening in increasing frequency and intensity, but this will increase in both intensity and frequency. And that's the dangerous part. Because if like these US wildfire and extreme cold snap, which is called a cold snap, when the jet stream gets weakened and the polar vortex breaks through, these are not one-off events. I remember in 2014, when we were in 2014, I think, when we were in New York, such a cold snap happened.
Yeah.
And even the hotel we are staying in, the pipes, the water froze, the pipes burst. And this is an interesting this is an interesting graph. This shows where people are getting displaced by this climate extreme events, where the maximum number of displacement are happening. And in that, if you focus on India, if you increase this a bit, if you focus on India and South Asia, yes, you'll see a huge circle. That means the area that we live in, this is Africa, but if you put your cursor in the India and Bangladesh, and also close to Pakistan and those areas, you will see huge areas where people are getting displaced by huge numbers.
Yeah.
But along with that, where you are putting this earlier in Africa, see, these are connected with the problem all across the European continent and in US. Now there is a hue and cry about refugees, about migrants coming in huge number. Why are those migrants coming? Why are people leaving their homes, their fields, their loved ones, their cities and villages, and why are they taking life risks and trying to cross the Mediterranean, trying to cross through dense jungles, through the Mesoamerican impenetrable jungle areas? This is exactly the reason. Because if you look at the East Africa large circle, these areas have been hit by repeated droughts and floods. So people's livelihoods have been completely devastated. People have land, there is no water to grow any crop. I have personally seen in Africa, in some of these areas, people scratching dried river basins, taking up after an hour or so, taking up a few cups of dirty, muddy water, putting it through a cloth and drinking that water. If people are reduced to that, what else they can do but to migrate and go out and try to go to some country where they can at least live. Not live a very good life maybe, but they can at least live. And this is a kind of thing that is happening, not because these people have done some wrong. It is happening because the same Europeans and Americans and Japanese and Koreans over the last 100 years have put in huge amount of greenhouse gases. They have built up their wealth. They have built up their technology. They have built up their all economies using huge amount of fossil fuels, using resources from the same poorer countries. And now the impact is being felt across the globe. But the countries like US and Europe, they have much better resources in terms of money, in terms of technology, and in terms of infrastructure.
But
To
even
somehow
the technology has not helped Los Angeles, California. That is the
technology
$1 billion
will
point.
not move this out. Technology will only help building again. Money will only help in building again. Like all the billionaires and multimillionaires who are losing houses, all of them have insurances. So even they lose a few millions, they will get back some house. But the people in Bangladesh, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, in Somalia, in Sudan, they have nothing more. Their houses, their farms, they don't have insurance. They don't have the money to rebuild. So for them, there is no other way but to try to migrate. As long as they are alive, like any animal does, they also have to do that. So this again is across the world. This is not limited to one country. This is not limited to one region. And the earlier idea, a lot of people used to say, it's only the poorer countries and the countries who will get hit. Now we are seeing very, very clearly over the last several years that all across the world, the countries and populations are getting hit. The only thing that I am pointing out, can you show me the flood picture here? The next to the fire, the flood one, the Hurricane Helen. This was the condition after Hurricane Helen hit. And again, one have to remember that September generally is not and in this season, this was last
September.
First cyclone that developed was Beryl, and Beryl developed first major cyclone or hurricane. It's the same thing we call cyclone in US and this area, it is called hurricane. Same tropical storms. So this first category 5 hurricane, which was Beryl, it developed in June. And that's not at all the time when cyclone season start or hurricane season start. And when Helen hit, within a period of around 4 or 5 weeks, there were 5 or 6 such hurricanes which were developing. And the other impact that has happened is these hurricanes, and in our region, cyclones, in the Philippines and other areas, typhoons, all of them are intensifying extremely fast. From the point they are tracked that, okay, cyclogenesis has happened, that means the low pressure area and the depression has started. That's the beginning of the cyclogenesis, where hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, all of these are same thing, called by different names. So this starts. But the intensification into a full-formed hurricane or cyclone is happening very fast. And that's because a lot of moisture is being pumped into the air. And for a storm, moisture condensing is the fuel. So if you have so much fuel coming into it, so the power of the hurricane also goes up by magnitudes, order of magnitude. So in that consequence of that, one of the major consequences is that hurricanes, cyclones are forming early in the season. If we look at Tamil Nadu this year, in December, which is beyond the cyclone season, because the cyclone season lasts maximum up to first week of December or end of November. In December this year, this cyclone, which was this Fengal, which hits Tamil Nadu here. So these kind of things which human beings in the coastal areas have never experienced earlier are happening because we have successfully disturbed, and not only disturbed to a very large scale and disrupted the earth system. There are 9 earth systems which are interconnected. These are massive systems. And as human beings, earlier we never realized or never felt that we have enough power to disrupt earth-wise systems. But today we are very clearly seeing the global disruption, the global pollution of greenhouse gases is in such a massive scale that we have actually been successful in disrupting even these massive earth systems. So one very clear warning that is there. This is happening, this fire is in US. In India, there are, in fact, last 22-23, there are lots and lots of wildfires. So, and much, much higher than the normal number. Yeah. What does it show us? What does it show us? And if you look at this, a global water cycle, as I was saying, that was the most disrupted cycle. And this picture is from Wayanad in Kerala, where around 350 people probably died. This was the Wayanad disaster was not very widespread. It was quite a limited area.
Limited to that northern Kerala.
Yes. Northern Kerala, Wayanad district, that too, not all across Wayanad district. Yeah. Because it was a much, much more localized event. But even that event caused such a massive disaster. Yeah. Comparatively smaller event. What we are now facing, this kind of events and much larger events are going to happen in far more increasing frequency, and some of the intensity is also increasing.
Right.
So I'll also like to point out that in the Indian climate change governance architecture, we have a National Disaster Management Act, which is under the Ministry of Home Affairs. We have some climate change related studies, which is being done by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And we have the scientific studies being done by IITM, etc. Some of these are under Ministry of Earth Sciences. So these 3 ministries and their mechanisms, one, the mechanisms under the National Disaster Management Act, which 2005, which was formulated after the tsunami hit, is completely inadequate. In fact, they have completely failed to take cognizance of the increasing number of disasters, the kind of disasters that is increasing in kind of areas. They have completely ignored the necessity of mapping most vulnerable areas, which areas are vulnerable to which kind of climatic disaster, to which frequency, which are the populations most vulnerable. Without mapping this out, how can a national system or a state system hope to respond in real time when the crisis depends or the crisis arises? So, and if you look at recent amendments, the recent amendment in the National Disaster Management Act, that's a negative amendment, because what they did in response to the Kerala Bank's effort to write off the loans of the Wayanad disaster affected people, the center brought in an amendment which took off the power for the National Disaster Management Agency authority to recommend writing of loans of disaster hit people.
Such
That
a
means
shame.
such an anti-people, such a cruel measure when people are facing this disaster in increasing frequencies and increasing intensities. Even the basic act of writing off their outstanding loans so that they can try to recover has been that power, the power to recommend that has been now been taken out of this act. So NDMA or SDMS cannot do it anymore. They can only states which, if the states are a little better, more responsive to citizens, they can only get some out of budget allotment. And if you look at the budget has absolutely nothing for this kind of increasing disasters, this kind of events, no foresight, no preparation, because the total budget of the Ministry of Environment and Forest, which is primarily responsible for studies and pointing out and everything, as I said, the disaster management part is under Ministry of Home Affairs. But if you look at the structures that they have made, the Environment Ministry gets around 3,300 crores, 3,400 crores out of a budget of 27 lakh crores plus. That means less than 2% of the total budgetary allocation. If we are facing some environmental crisis, if the climate crisis has intensified, does it sound good that the entire Environment Ministry, including its provision for salaries and their travels and LTAs and everything together, and their offices and cars, you allocate less than 2%, less than even 1.5% of the budget to a ministry which is dealing with such critical things? And if you look at the Disaster Management Act and the disaster management structure, it's basically centered around policing. Look at them under NDMA. Who comes? NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, State Disaster Response Force. So it's all about trained forces responding once the disaster happens. What happens before, when the risk is there, when the hazard is there, so that the disaster do not happen, is very little. Though the recent amendment has introduced those languages like risk assessment, etc., but nothing of this nature is visible in the entire act and its mechanism. So I think it's high time
At least
that
they should learn after this Los Angeles fire.
And Los Angeles fire, they are probably not even bothered. If they had bothered, they would have taken notice in 2023 probably, or 22.
Yeah.
There were 136,000 fires, forest fires and other fires in India in the first 4 months alone. January, February, March, April, which is the winter season. April is not the winter season, but January, February, March and part of April. In India, there were 136,600 forest fires. That should have been the point where the ministry and the government should have taken notice that this is something very serious. We should wake up to all the areas. And can you imagine that one of the fastest increasing climatic impacts that is there in India, and there are projections not only in the IPCC, but projections also in the Ministry of Earth Sciences' own report, which was released in 2020 by Mr. Harshavardhan, who was at the Minister of Earth Science at that point of time. Even that report projects that the heat waves are going to increase 5 to 7 times or more by 2050, 2060, that decade. So, see, heat waves and heat indexes are the fastest increases impact on people in India who have to work exposed in that heat, in that hot atmosphere.
Yeah.
7 to 8 crores construction workers, 3 to 4 crore street vendors, 14 crore plus small farmers and agricultural laborers families. Then there are porters, rickshaw pullers. We have 65 crores of people who have to work in these extremely hot conditions in the summer, exposed to the elements. And heat wave is increasing at a very fast rate. But can you imagine that the government of India refuses to notify heat waves as a notified disaster? Because unless the government notifies a particular kind of disaster as a disaster, the mechanism of addressing that from the government will not be triggered. Like in Delhi, there is a GRAP, Graded Response Action Plan for pollution, air pollution. So if increases beyond 300, you trigger these actions. It goes beyond 400, you trigger these actions. Something like that, if there is not put in place, how does the government machinery react or respond? It will not respond.
Prime Minister and ministers stay in Delhi. That's why they are trying to do that. And
Plus
disaster means COVID. Disaster means COVID. See, China, how they are playing pharmacy and insurance. If they get money, they do everything. But if people are the citizens of the country, because of climate change, if they are going to suffer on a day-to-day basis, season to season, government doesn't act. Pathetic that this government has taken away all the provisions of NDMC, risk assessment also. It's shameful.
DMA.
So before we say bye, sir, we have only 2 minutes now, 3 minutes.
Fine.
Now, what would now the chaos, climate chaos is global now. Now, what is the message you would like to give, right from India to California?
My point is very clear that Indian people forget about California fires in India, because this is a wake-up call, but we have had so many wake-up calls. Now it is more than high time. The government must consult the many people's groups. Government must come out with a much more responsive climate action plan based on clear scientific vulnerability mapping, vulnerability in terms of geographic areas, vulnerability in terms of different vulnerable populations, because not all populations in one geography are equally vulnerable. And there are noted methods, there are known methods, the science is available, the technology is available within India. We must use all this, and we must improve the disaster management mechanism, the entire architecture that has been built up, which has been built around polishing and rescue and relief, which must be turned toward disaster risk reduction, disaster assessment, risk reduction, empowering the local communities through the panchayat. We have the 73rd, 74th Amendment. So the wards and panchayats have a system. We must reach to that level, empower those bodies to immediately respond to developing disaster situation, and also map and reduce the risk to normal people. So that's the message. Without that, we'll face far, far greater disaster than either California or northern US today is facing, or what Wayanad has faced.
What Wayanad has faced, and what would be the main reasons? How can you have inclusive, citizen inclusive centric? What should citizens do themselves and put pressure on the government?
See, like we have been doing, trying to mobilize large groups, because it's not a question of one or two people or a group of experts. We are also trying to work with large groups like unions, like the coastal fish workers are one of the most impacted groups. The street vendors, small scale hawkers are one of the most impacted groups. So citizens groups like this, who are the most impacted and most vulnerable, we who understand a bit of it, we who understand what is happening, how it is happening, and what can be done, and where intervention need to be done, we should work with these large groups, which should be in the front line, and raise larger voices, put pressure on the government, because the government and the political setup will not listen unless there are numbers behind those demands. So the number of people that is raising demands, the number of institutions that are raising, the organizations that are raising those demands have to be substantial. And that's a large task which we all should do. And in that, I think channels like yours might also help.
Yes, that's what we are trying to do. Hopefully, they understand the environmental science, all those politicians and administrators. That is the best part of all these things. Once they understand, at least after Los Angeles, how the neo-rich got devastated, if our politicians and administrators